Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of CFO Plans Fireside Chat. Today we are speaking with Rafael Rosengarten, the CEO of Genialis. We'll get into the company in a bit, but let's start with Rafael himself first. Rafael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here.
What inspired you into being biotech as a child? Looking back.
Yeah, well, I can guarantee you, I also, as a child, didn't say, hey, I want to be in biotech. I'm entirely an accidental entrepreneur, and I can tell the story backwards or forwards, but I'll go back in time to, let's say, when I was 7 years old and what I thought I wanted to be when I grew up. I grew up in the backwoods in South Carolina, on the coast near the Cape Remain Wildlife Refuge, about an hour north of Charleston, but seriously in a backwoods community. It was really rural. It was kind of untouched by time and history. It was a wonderful place to grow up. You can imagine having, as a boy, complete access to nature with no worries in the world. And somehow my best friend and I got it in our heads that we wanted to grow up to be scientists and inventors. So we already kind of knew that we wanted to do innovation, right? We just didn't know the word innovation. And that same year, when I was 7 years old, my family traveled for the first time to visit my aunt and uncle who lived in the south of France. And now my uncle was a cell biologist, and he ran a laboratory on the Mediterranean coast in a town called Villefranche-sur-Mer. And he taught me how to snorkel off the rocks and the jetties right by his laboratory. And this was a laboratory that harkened back to an earlier age of science when you could do truly cutting edge cellular and molecular biology using what today would be considered non-traditional model organisms. So if you wanted to study fertilization, you would probably study it in a sea urchin, not in a fruit fly, but a sea urchin, because the oocytes are big and fertilization is easy to watch. And so he studied jellyfish and urchins and things that floated and blobbed and things that clung to the rocks. And I knew then, okay, I want to be a scientist, right? But along the way, what I wanted to be, what kind of science I wanted to do changed a lot. And in fact, there were periods of my life where I didn't know that I wanted to be a scientist. College, I graduated from Dartmouth College with a degree in evolutionary biology. I actually dropped out of science and I went to New York City and I became a cook. And I worked as just a line cook, actually the guy cutting things and frying things, not a chef, but a cook earning his living at a restaurant that went on to earn a Michelin star. So I was doing really fancy cuisine thinking maybe I want to be a chef one day. And a combination of events drew me back into science, one of which is I missed getting to visit with that same French biologist uncle that summer. And I saw his photographs of hosting wonderful dinner parties for all of his scientist friends. And I missed that because I spent the hot, grueling summer in a windowless kitchen in Manhattan, cooking, doing the thing I thought I wanted to do. And I realized, listen, I don't know any cooks who have real hobbies outside of, maybe playing guitar and doing drugs. But I know lots of scientists who have great hobbies and who experience the world through these curious eyes. And one of those hobbies could be cooking. So I went that route. I went back to graduate school. And, well, they say the rest is history, but there's actually still quite some time before figuring out the biotech part of biology.
That's quite the interesting story. I was going to get into your next phase in your life. So you first, you went to Dartmouth first, earning your bachelor's, and then headed into Yale to getting your PhD. So both very prestigious universities. So your experiences during this educational journey must have shaped your then future into a biotech career, right? So what are some of the specific mentions, projects, or mentors that you may have had during those times that really shaped your direction in the professional career path?
Yeah, I had great professors at Dartmouth, but what I took away from Dartmouth, looking back on it, the reason I went there in the first place and my experience that remained valuable to me was the courage of the students who go there. So I think something that really marks a Dartmouth student, or at least marked a Dartmouth student when I was attending, I graduated in 2001, so over 20 years ago. But I think this is still true. The school selects for kids who truly believe they can do anything in the world. And it was this kind of courage, this kind of confidence that stuck with me. I don't know that I always felt that confidence, but I had enough courage to go down to Manhattan, print out a very thin resume. I hadn't done a lot of cooking, and go to the top restaurants in the city and say, I can do this, right? And by the same token, I figured I could go to Yale and do top flight science. I actually worked at Yale for a little bit in a laboratory in order to build relationships and get some recommendations, maybe to support my less than stellar undergraduate grades. But the two scientific mentors who were most important to me at Yale were Doctors Leo Buss and Stephen Della Porta. Stephen was my actual PhD advisor in the molecular cellular developmental biology department. He was an old school molecular geneticist. He had trained with Barbara McClintock and worked on corn genetics. But he welcomed me into the lab as this wannabe marine biologist who had done all my marine biology with Leo Buss in the evolution department to figure out how to study molecules and genes and genomes in organisms that didn't have genome sequencing projects underway or where we had to do a lot of the actual work ourselves. And so I got some great old school training from these old school scientists. And the other thing that I really appreciated is they didn't force me to do the one thing that seemed that everyone said you had to do. You know, my department chairman said, you can choose among these 7 genetic organisms to study. But I remembered my uncle. I remembered he liked to work on other things. And I liked other things. And so these two guys really encouraged me to just do what I was curious about, do what I was passionate about. And so that, you know, that really marked my graduate career, this opportunity to think independently, to follow one's passion, to not feel constrained by, quote, the rules of institutionalized science, right? And that was great. The other thing about going to graduate school at Yale was just the social community. There's a neighborhood in New Haven, at least there used to be, called the Graduate School Ghetto, the Grad Ghetto, which just meant it was a neighborhood, a series of blocks of this actually quite nice neighborhood. There was just graduate students all lived there and worked there and partied there together. But we weren't all scientists, right? So my best friends were some scientists, but also law students and business school students and international relations students. And it was that diversity of thought that I think really created a special environment to not, again, feel constrained that there's only one path forward.
I love in the architecture and all that, yeah. And you talk about a very serious subject in a very fun way, so that's great to see. So let's switch gears to Genialis, right? So I'll let you define what the company is, what Genialis is all about, and what's the technology behind it, and then from there we can go into the expansion from there. So if you can talk a bit about what's the vision, what's the company is doing, what it is all about.
Absolutely. I'm going to spend 30 more seconds on background because we haven't gotten to Genialis yet. And the next 2 bits are important. Yeah. So the thing I did after Yale is I completely changed my field and I went to California and I worked as a synthetic biologist. So basically a molecular design and cloning guru at the Lawrence Berkeley Labs Joint Bioenergy Institute. It was a brand new facility with a large amount of government funding to basically change the way that we built fuels through biological processes. And the only reason I bring that up is I only spent 18 months there, but I loved it. I loved it. I loved the work. I loved the people. But I caught the bug to do something commercial. Until then, I would have been happy being a beach bum marine biologist, scuba diving and snorkeling for a postdoc salary for the rest of my life, right? But it was in California that I realized, hey, this stuff that we do, these scientific breakthroughs can have a massive impact on society. And the way to have the biggest impact, I felt for me, was to think about commercializing things rather than publishing things, right? To focus on company building, technology formation, or technology building rather than just science itself for science sake. I followed a girl who's now my wife to Houston. She is in the traditional energy sector. I came to Houston, went to the medical center, which is the world's largest medical center. So away from fuels, even though Houston's obviously a big energy town, but back into biomedicine. And that's where I met at Baylor College of Medicine during a postdoctoral stint some data scientists. And these data scientists were from Slovenia, from Europe. I dare you to find Slovenia on a map. It's arguably the prettiest country in the world I've ever been to, but it's small, punches well above its weight in terms of PhDs per capita in science. And these guys had started Genialis. So I am going to answer your question, I promise. My co-founder, Micha Stajdahar, had just started Genialis after finishing his PhD in artificial intelligence. And he had come with his academic mentor, who also spent time at Baylor College of Medicine, to work in the labs to figure out, all right, we've got this little company, we've got all this great technology from my graduate lab. What are the problems in biomedicine we can solve? And one of the problems in the early days of Genialis they wanted to solve is they wanted to have an American co-founder, someone who came from the life science side, the biology side, because they were all IT guys, tech guys, who could help them both figure out the problem space, but also figure out how to actually be a global company in the US. For some reason, I don't know why, they thought I was that person. I was actually an early customer of the technology. We used to, in my lab as a postdoc, we would use their software and we would collaborate on the AI algorithm development. I drank the Kool-Aid. I thought it was the most amazing transformative technology. It is the most amazing transformative technology. And I knew that this was where all of these things, these threads of innovation and inventorship and technology and commercialization, and even looking in weird parts of the biological world to find solutions that would help mankind and help society, were all coming together. So I joined at the end of 2015. This company was still in stealth largely, as a co-founder, as the head of product. I wasn't the CEO at the time. And so there were 4 co-founders at that time, me and Micha and 2 guys back in Slovenia, a handful of bioinformaticians and some software engineers. And the problem that we wanted to solve, that I really wanted to solve, and that we're still working on today, is how do we create an AI model that truly understands cancer biology, that understands the biology. And then we can use this AI model that understands cancer biology to find the right patients for drugs, to find the right drugs for patients, to find new drug targets and new compounds themselves. This is not a unique pursuit. If you follow the biotech world, this is where everybody has arrived, right? So people are using things like large language models that have become famous thanks to ChatGPT and OpenAI to try to come up with a general model of biology. People are using all sorts of big AI approaches, big data approaches. But back in 2015, there weren't so many, right? Like this was a pretty far-fetched daydream. It's taken us a decade to really see the technology mature, to see the scale and scope of the data mature, and to have honestly put in the blood, sweat, and tears of figuring out how to work with those data in a way that you can make the AI actually give you useful, therapeutically relevant clinical insights. And I would say that that's what Genialis has really done. So when we started, we knew we wanted to build this sort of general model of cancer biology with AI. We also knew that getting enough good quality data in the right place and doing something with that data was going to be the biggest barrier. And so we built a beautiful piece of software called Genialis Expressions, which turned out people wanted to use on its own. It was great software for analyzing sequencing data and playing with it. And so we built that and we started selling that. And frankly, got a little bit distracted. We went on a detour selling the software, but all the while we figured out how to work with those data. And if there's one thing in the world that Genialis might be the best at, of anyone in the world, I think it's working with gene expression data, with transcriptomics data. We are able to turn that crude into absolute rocket fuel, right? We've figured out how to refine those data to make it a really, really high value commodity and to fuel our AI algorithms. And so, all those years of really busting our butts building the software, figuring out the right way to make this data work is paying off, because now we are in fact building AI models that touch the lives of patients, that can analyze a patient's data and tell them exactly what cancer therapy is going to best work for them. We're helping drug companies develop the next generation of life-saving drugs. We're helping diagnostics companies build the next round of tests that are going to make sure that patients get the best possible medicines. And we're helping physicians and patients make the best possible decisions about their ongoing care. So that was a very long answer. But that's what we do. That's what we do in a large nutshell. Yeah.
I was going to say, like, you covered most of a couple of next questions also. Like, I was going to ask, like, what were some of the early challenges? You kind of touched upon it, but I'll let you speak to that again. What are some of the early challenges? And also, looking back, what were some of the milestones that you are most proud of? So if you can just shed some
So maybe I'll answer this question a little differently, because I've already talked about some of the technology challenges, and I know we've got a rather diverse audience today. Not everyone wants to understand the nitty gritty of why getting certain kinds of molecules from certain kinds of samples and then analyzing is hard. Here's some other challenges that I think are actually much more applicable to startups and young companies in general. So maybe the single biggest challenge is to stay focused. There are a million problems you can solve. How do you choose one? And then how do you make sure you keep banging on that problem until you've actually got a solution? How do you know if the market wants your solution, right? So when we were starting this, again, around 2015, there was this movement led largely by Andreessen Horowitz, the storied venture capital firm. They had done really well with the kind of, early web companies sort of pioneering the SaaS business model, right? Software as a service, huge margins. Software is eating the world, as Mark Andreessen famously said. So they launched a biotech fund or biofund, and they said software is going to eat biology now. And not only are all the companies from that early fund, but all the rest of us were thinking, holy crap, the oracles at Andreessen Horowitz said that we have to do SaaS. So we all tried to build SaaS software, software that we would sell on a licensing basis or a subscription basis, and you try to scale with users. And a few companies have succeeded at that, but a very precious few in the life sciences. What I think most of us realized, and it took some of us longer than others, is the real value in life sciences. There are some very valuable tools companies, but the real value is unlocking new discoveries, but then owning those discoveries. So new molecules, new targets, right? New diagnostics. And so our path was a windy path of kind of like testing the business model, building a product that would serve a business model, realizing the business model wasn't scaling the way we wanted to, having to think about how our product could serve something bigger. You know, as a company, we've gone through some pretty big pivots. One really big pivot in 2018, when I took over as CEO, we had already raised some venture capital. The business model wasn't working. We had to do something different. So it was all about figuring out what have we built is really valuable? How can we reposition that to be more valuable still? But that's a continuous process, I think. I think the story of a startup that goes from conception, opening its doors, to point A to point B in a straight line is actually rather mythical. I don't think most companies do that. Right. And there are some really famous companies like Airbnb where they started out to do one thing and they realized, oh crap, there's a gold mine here if we do something different. But even there, I don't think there was only one realization that if they changed focus or changed direction, that it could be bigger. Startups are always course correcting. For that matter, big companies are too, right? Big companies have to stay with the times. They have to acquire new technology to keep competitive. So the challenges that are universal are these questions of what do we focus on today? How do we stay focused? But how do we know when it's time to shift focus, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So speaking of like where you are right now, so looking into the future now, like we talked about like how we built from inception to now. So looking into the future, what are some of the innovations that are coming that you're most excited about? What are your goals in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. So today, Genialis is a company. We've raised our Series A year and a half ago. Today, Genialis has multiple machine learning algorithms that we've developed into products that we partner with pharma companies to help them develop life-saving drugs, right? So these are machine learning models that can tell the pharma company which patients are going to benefit from their drug. And we also partner them with diagnostics companies, and those diagnostics companies can build tests that can be run on patients in the clinic. Again, either by way of clinical trial or by way of an actual test on market or out in the world. There are two really big things coming down the pipe for Genialis. The first one is on the technology side, the algorithm side. We're building a technology, we're quite well on our way, that will allow us not just to have one machine learning model at a time that says, here's a model for this new class of drugs, drug A. To be very specific, we have a new model for KRAS therapeutics, that's a drug target. So any drug that is hitting this really important cancer gene KRAS, we can predict its outcomes. But we're building a model of models. We're building something we call a supermodel. And our supermodel is going to work for every single cancer drug target. Every cancer patient will be able to have their tumor assessed by RNA sequencing and then by our model. And our model will tell you exactly what therapeutic intervention is going to work best for that patient. So every cancer target, every cancer drug, every cancer patient. That's true scale. The other important thing that's coming is our business is always evolving. So right now, we mostly license our models out to drug companies and diagnostics companies. We're capturing much more of that value chain by actually building the assays with partners, but building them for ourselves, trying to capture more of the workflow, more of the value, but owning control over the process so that we can make sure that these algorithms are turned into tests ready for patients as quickly and efficiently as needed and putting them in the hands of doctors who can actually save lives if they get them in time.
Absolutely. Hopefully, we can see some of these solutions commercially available within our lifetime. It looks like we are getting there sooner than we expected.
Yeah, we're moving very fast right now. So I think that'll be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to hear. So let's switch gears a little bit. So CFO Plans, that's us.
Yeah.
So we have been partner in your success for a long time now. I mean, from the inception of the company, Genialis chose CFO Plans to be the accounting services provider, the back office operations, and all that. So, some of so if you can kind of mention specific examples or the ways CFO Plans have contributed to your
Sure.
growth, expansion, and financial success.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to the thing I said is the biggest challenge that any startup faces, right? It's what do you focus on? And unless you happen to be some sort of accounting services or back office startup, if you're doing anything else in the world, I can guarantee you the thing you don't want to focus on is bookkeeping.
Yeah.
It's financial reporting, it's account. You just don't want to think about it. You want it to get done.
Yeah.
You want it to get done right. You want someone who can help you navigate the complexities of local tax policies, whatever. And me especially, I'm a biologist. I'll say my wife keeps the books in our house. Like, I don't like thinking about this stuff. I don't want to think about this stuff. If I were in charge of the books at Genialis, I'd be in jail by now, right? Like we need somebody who can do it. So, that's the number one thing. That's the number one thing CFO Plans has done for us is I have not, one day in my life had to actually be the person concerned with setting up the finances in the company. Now, I've had many very hardworking colleagues within Genialis who work with your team and who have had to worry about that, right? But I haven't. And I've known that we've had an economic, affordable solution that can scale with us or scale down with us as needed, right? So, when we've gone through rounds of diligence, especially around financings, we've demanded a lot more of your team's time, right, to put together, certain records and so forth. At other times, where we've brought on a comptroller internally, where he's taken over certain things, we've been able to take stuff off your hand. And it's a very flexible sort of partnership rather than a one-size-fits-all product out of a can that's been so useful. Not only do we not really have to worry about it so much, but we know that whatever level of service we need can be had. And so those are the two pieces that have been especially valuable to me.
Thank you for that. Thanks for that stamp of trust on us. So let's switch gears a little bit again. So we are in an election year in US. So we're still a little bit struggling with the high inflation and our national debt is soaring up to 35 trillion now, and it's going above the GDP now. So obviously, this economic struggle a little bit it has affected all industries. So biotech and healthcare is no stranger to that. So how do you see it? How do you see healthcare and biotechnology getting affected, or not getting affected for that matter, for the next 5 to 10 years? And how do you see that kind of navigating on its own despite the economic ups and downs?
Yeah, that's a great question. God, there's so many ways I can answer. I'll talk briefly about a few things that I think really matter in biotech. So the first one I think is free trade, right? So the idea of creating trade wars and putting up punitive or petty tariffs against certain countries is antithetical to the flow of innovation and ideas, right? And biotech has truly become a global enterprise, right? In our work, it's really important that we have data that represent people of all ethnogeographic origins and that we're able to go to other countries and collaborate to get useful data sets, right? Sometimes those data can't leave those countries. We have to work with the data in sight. That's fine. But we want to be able to build transnational relationships. The other thing is talent, right? Restricting immigration in ad hoc and punitive ways is a terrible idea if the goal is to have the United States be the innovation leader, the brain trust leader of the world, especially with the pace quickening around artificial intelligence, right? AI is going to be a global battlefield for supremacy, and we do not want to shoot ourselves in the foot by restricting who can come to this country to be, the next great thought leaders. So those are two ways that I think presidential policies could impact biotech. Other things that matter, and this is now looking back a little bit. In 2021, there was, a bunch of the different markets started declining, but biotech really burst, right? So the biotech market in September 2021 was at an all-time high. It was we call it frothy. It was a bubble, right? So interest rates had been zero more or less for a decade. So capital was free, venture capital was flush, and we were just pumping money into biotech because there were no interest rates to be had. You might as well put your money in these speculative things. Right. But at the same time, we were in the midst of COVID, kind of realizing we had a solution to COVID. And that solution, the heroes of that solution were biotechs. It was Moderna, it was BioNTech, right? These were our heroes. And so I think there was a lot of goodwill around the world towards biotech. So again, the public markets and the private markets in biotech were very hot, and they overheated in the beginning of end of Q3, beginning of Q4, 2021. What that meant is the stock market went down, the IPO window slammed shut, and then late stage venture capital froze up, and then early stage venture capital stopped coming in as fast, right? So there's this knock-on effect down the ladder. And for a company like ours that does a lot of business by selling products and services into pharma, that was a gut punch, right? Like 2 of our biggest customers went out of business, right? They just went out of business.
Right.
There's nothing we did wrong. There's nothing wrong with the science. Like we had great collaborations, just they quit existing because they ran out of funding, right? And so that was a pretty common story. So I think that coming up with sound fiscal policy, and I'm not the one to tell you what the sound fiscal policy is, but striking a balance where we can get interest rates down enough that more long-term and high-risk investing dollars start coming back in, where we can also support innovation through public policy so that life sciences and biotech are supported, where we can make patient data more portable, actually empower patients to consent their data into rather than making it as restricted. I think all of these need to be priorities that do come, in fact, from policy. Yeah. The one I'll say again is not just a question of labor, it's also going to be a question of policy and regulation. And so getting AI policy right is crucial. Right. I do a lot of work in the AI policy realm through another hat that I wear as a board director and founder of the Alliance for AI in Healthcare. This is a global nonprofit organization. We're an advocacy organization for the responsible adoption of AI in healthcare, right? And I capital letter R, _ responsible adoption of AI in healthcare. And I work with some amazing colleagues from great companies like Roche Genentech, historically J&J, Bayer, Envisagenics, Recursion Pharma, and Silicon Medicine, and some universities and law firms like Tulane, Folio-Hoag, Morrison Forster, et cetera. It's a really great group of people, but a serious brain trust, and we do a lot of thought leadership. We're involved in the National Institutes in Standard and Technology, AI work. The idea, though, is we want to get this right, because I think that consumer-facing AI, the kind of restrictions you want to put on a social media app to avoid the spread of deep fakes, may be different from the kind of restrictions you would put on a diagnostics company that's developing a patient classifier using AI, right? The use cases are different. And in the latter case, we already have a regulatory framework for healthcare stuff. And so I think that working within the existing FDA, EMA regulatory framework, but putting in place very smart updates to contemplate where AI is going, where it's coming from, and with data privacy and protection at the center is really interesting work. And that's something that, the leader, whoever's the next president will have a big say over how much of a priority that is, but also who they put in place to shepherd it. And I will say that I was impressed, but the Biden administration put out an executive order at the beginning of this year. I think it was the beginning of this year, an executive order, massive document, directing all of the federal agencies, every cabinet agency, to come up with a plan within either 6 to 9 months, depending. And there was a big focus on national security, cyber defense, biosecurity, et cetera, but there was also stuff on healthcare. Right. And what impressed me was simply the thoughtfulness of it. It was clear that they had a room or several rooms full of experts coming up with, these are the things we need to think about. And so, my hope is that level of expertise remains and is I'm not going to say calling the shots, but asking the questions going forward.
Right. And I think also by the way, we have a bunch of audience questions. We'll get to that in a minute. Also, when you're describing, how you partnered with, your original founders from Slovenia, and then all the way up to how you are working with various pharmaceutical and other biotech companies. I was watching this video on game theory last night. So how cooperation makes everyone win instead of party defects in sight of short-term gain. They always kind of lose in the end, both sides. So it was an interesting reminder that cooperation not only within local vicinities in the US, but rather when you get the expertise from everywhere, from anywhere in the world, and then you cooperate, the whole world gains in the end. Especially it's applicable to something like biotechnology, because when you solve something, everyone in the world gains from that. So it's a very good reminder. So when you are describing these policy matters, it's very helpful in terms of overall win, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so let's get into a couple of questions. So like I'll go in the order we received. We probably touched upon this a little bit, but let's cover this. So first question is like, would you recommend finding alternative revenue streams in terms of like you spoke of like software products, things of that nature. So in terms of first the success of the company, so because if
Hmm.
financial success is important for doing big things later, right? So I mean, for example, Amazon started with selling books, but later on now it has become a big product and
Right.
it's everywhere, right? So you kind of have to survive and increase your reserves to do greater things. So the question is like for larger scale impact, like how important it is to like have a multi-layer revenue stream and
Yeah.
like bigger picture vision, and how it will help the bigger picture vision.
It's a great question. All right. So I've got a lot of different thoughts and I'm trying to put them in an order that it's going to make some sense and not make me sound like I'm contradicting myself left and right. All right. First of all, revenue. Yeah. Like revenue solves a lot of problems, covers a lot of warts, makes everyone friends, right? If you have revenue, that's great. Not all revenue is the same, however, right? So you can have short-term revenue, long-term revenue, predictable revenue. And I think the nature of your revenue stack and how satisfied you should be with it is going to depend a lot on the kind of company you're trying to build. We are venture backed, which means that we need to achieve venture scale at some point, right? And venture capital really is like an addictive drug. There have been some fairly crude analogies made to hamster wheels and cocaine addictions and things like that. But once you start using venture capital to grow your company, you've got a commitment to, or at least a vision to achieve some very large success. You can get there with lots of little revenue or a small number of big revenue sources, right? But you've got to recognize that not all revenue is going to get you there, and you need to understand what you're selling to whom and sort of what are the units, what are the unit economics that are going to make that work. So that's just one obvious sort of truism. But then there are other ways to think about it, right? In the early days of a company, Paul Graham, who famously helped found Y Combinator and is kind of a thought leader in the world of startup, he wrote a really famous essay. He's written a lot of them, but one of his essays that resonates a lot with me is, in the early days of a startup company, even though your goal is to maximize scalability, right? You want to have the highest margin revenue, the highest, most scalable tech, et cetera. You want to achieve the most with the fewest people. In the early days, you're going to have to do things that don't scale, right? You're going to have to go into the living rooms of your first customers and make sure they're happy. You're going to have to give them back massages while they try out your products so that they're relaxed. Like, you need to do things that you're not going to be able to do forever, but you need to do them early to get that early revenue. And so I guess what I would say there, the advice is, at least in the early days, sometimes revenue just is revenue, right? You don't have to worry so much about whether it's the kind that you envision having 6 years from now. If you're selling books today, then selling book revenue is great. It doesn't have to be, high margin cloud services revenue, because that's not where you're at, right? Maybe the last, or one of the last things I'll say about revenue then is you want to be thoughtful about what kind of signal the revenue is sending you. So at least if you're building a tech company, this is maybe less true in the life sciences, but if you're building a tech company, the thing everyone's looking for in the early days is product market fit. And, do you have it? Do you have product market fit? How do you know if you have product market fit? Here, I would point you to some writings. I want to say it's from Mark Andreessen again, but it might have been Ben Horowitz, one of those guys, who wrote about how product market fit, you'll know it when you have it because the cash is just pouring in, right? Like, you can't sign customers up fast enough, et cetera. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but maybe some of the leading tech companies in the world have felt that way. But revenue tends to indicate that people want to pay you for the thing you're building or selling, right? That's what it means. You want to be very thoughtful about when you think the revenue you're receiving means that you've actually achieved some degree of product market fit, because that may be the time to go from bootstrapping, where you're just keeping the company alive based on your revenue, to actually looking for an investment. And the common wisdom is don't raise money don't raise much money until you get to product market fit. Get to product market fit as cheaply as you can, and then press on the gas pedal. That's the common wisdom. I can guarantee you that 99% of companies don't actually go that way exactly. But you want to be thoughtful about what your revenue means. The flip side of that is, if you're getting revenue from something that's not in your future plans, if you're making revenue from product A, but your plan is to actually build B, C, and D, your product A revenue may not indicate anything about future product market fit. And so you just want to be a little bit cautious how optimistic you get about it.
Right. Great answer. Yeah. So next one is about community. So like, unlike 50 years ago, like the ways we can collaborate with various individual biotech contributors and small groups, all the way to like big pharma, big biotech. So the technology has enabled any company doing research and or companies like yourself gain community knowledge in developing their products and the vision and the direction, right? So the question is about like how important it is. You think that the collaboration, how important it is to like collaborate with these various groups and individuals in your journey.
Collaboration is absolutely key. And again, we are a company, but we are also scientists, right? And we're building products for scientists. We're building scientifically based products. The science would be nowhere without collaboration. The good news is our academic training prepares us for this, right? So I met my co-founders through a collaboration. We were mostly technologists, so we've learned a lot about what we know about biology and the problems that we're trying to solve from collaborations with, say, pharma groups that are mostly biologists, but not tech guys, right? Or tech girls. So I think collaboration is absolutely key. It's key internally, right? And it's key externally. So our company has always been multinational, at least since I joined, right? We have my co-founder is Slovenian. We've built a big technology group there, but actually we have a lot of different functions in our Slovenian office. The US team has typically been more focused on the product, on customer success, and on business development. So we've had to figure out, how to communicate and how to collaborate across many time zones. And we also have a kind of remote first, very kind of flexible work policy. So we have we have a lot of folks who work, from home or from remote offices. We've just kind of solved that. And then our customers are all over the place. We have customers on four continents. So figuring out how to collaborate internally, it was a requirement just based on how our company was built. Then we started having customers in funny places. And so then we got more practice. And then, of course, the COVID pandemic occurred, and companies who were able to adapt most quickly to really lean collaboration models in the remote framework, I think, outperformed those who struggled with that. But we had been using Zoom since early 2016, right? We were like the earliest adopters, so we were ready. And I think if anything, the challenge now is kind of finding the right balance in a post-COVID pandemic world of how much of the collaboration should be in person and how much can we keep doing remotely. Right. And I would actually, despite the fact that I myself work remotely most of the time, I am really jealous of my teammates who get to go into the office 3 days a week, 5 days, however many days a week they want. I miss having the serendipity of in-person collaboration. And so, do as I say, not as I do. If you can manage in-person collaboration, show up.
That's the best. Yeah, of course. It's a different dynamic, of course. So, all right, we have one question, one opportunity for one last question. So it's a great question. So, how you kind of touched upon that in this last segment also. All the company, the structures are changing with AI influence, right? So like our traditional structures are kind of getting dismantled with not only the AI, but regular technology actually. So now the AI is in the picture. So how do you see the biotech organization structure changing with AI presence?
That's a really good question. In biotech, in that sector in particular, I think as of the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference this past January, so January 2024, was, I will say, I'm just picking that because it's a big industry event. I will call that the milestone event where it was clear that AI had arrived at the upper echelons of biotech, at big pharma, which is to say everybody recognized it is here and it's real and it's going to stay. In 2019, when we founded the Alliance for AI in Healthcare, at JP Morgan 2019, so 5 years prior. A big part of what we had to do, a big part of our challenge as an advocacy organization, was convincing people that AI was here and was real and was going to make a difference. Most people at the time, like most panels I would sit on, were like, is this just hype? Is it hype or is it whatever, fact or fiction? And you don't see those topics anymore. Yeah, there's still things that are hyped up. Of course there are. Every industry, every tech has hype. But everybody recognizes that the technology is real and it can do amazing things if it's properly built, properly trained, properly monitored, properly designed. This has to be thought about first, and properly deployed. So what you're seeing now is, whereas I think in those intervening years, 2019 to 24, the major modality of introducing AI and cutting edge technology like that into biotech were through specialist companies, startups, frankly, like ours,
Right.
that really figured out how to do a particular flavor of AI and would go and partner it into biotech and so forth. Over those years, though, the biotech companies started building internal teams. So it's not that they don't do collaborations externally or don't, buy solutions, but some of the coolest AI is now coming out of the bigger incumbent companies that didn't used to do AI but have figured it out, right? So now it's a real mix. It's a lot of home-built solutions, a lot of startup and really innovative new tech, and then things become commoditized, right? Like these LLMs seemingly came out of nowhere. There's actually a long history, but you had OpenAI and Claude and Google and all these others pop up with their competing LLMs. But now they're actually, you don't have to build a new LLM architecture. You can adopt the native LLM in the Azure cloud or the Amazon cloud and train it on your data for a particular problem. And so these things happen really fast, right? Like change in technology is nonlinear, and people tend to kind of progress in a more linear fashion, but the technology has these big inflection points.
Yeah.
And I think we've hit a couple in the last few years without necessarily realizing it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Great conversation, Rafi. Thanks for all the time and contribution, and we wish Genialis continued success and hope to see it scaling as to expectations. And someday it can be a great solution for oncology and cancer.
Well, absolutely my pleasure. And Gary, thank you and to your team for all the help you've given us along the way. And you will be the first to know as we scale.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Take care.